Good evening, everyone. Today on TelecomTalk Live, we are joined by Mr. Kishore Bitra, lead collaboration engineering based in Baltimore. Kishore worked closely with enterprise on secure collaboration system, and today we are discussing on zero trust, why it matters now, and how organizations should approach it in a practical way. Glad to have you with us, Mr. Kishore.
Hey, thank
Hey,
you, Tarun,
thank you,
for
Tarun,
inviting me
for
back,
Yep.
and
So,
glad to be back with a Zero Trust.
yeah. So, Kishore, tell us what exactly you're planning to explain to our audience today. And before that, what do you do and what's your role?
Sure, definitely. So, for those who don't me, again, good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Kishore, and I've been in the IT industry for more than 18 years, and my expertise lies in the security, Microsoft 365, cloud adoption, email security, large scale migrations, automations, integrations, and all those things, right? So that's what I do basically. But a big part of my role is turning security best practices into configurations that actually work. So zero trust security is part of that, and that's what we're gonna see today, right? What is zero trust security is all about? What are the concepts of that? What are the tools? What are the applications? What are the implementation plans? What are the pillars? We're going to demystify all those things in today's topic.
Okay, great, Kishore. So please go ahead, Kishore. Like, I believe you have prepared some presentation and all for
Yeah,
our audience. So please start. Yep,
yeah, definitely. Let me share my presentation real quick.
sure.
Think that should load.
Yep. 1 second, Kishore.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah,
All
go
right.
ahead, Kishore.
Perfect. I think this is great. Okay.
Yep.
So again, I told about me, but just to be about what I do. Again, as I said, I'm into this industry for more than 18 years, and I do all about security, migration stuff, and all those things. And I do write content, the tech content. You can explore my tech journal at kbitra.substack.com. That's what I share, what I learn, and what I do. Right. Without any delays, let's get started to that one. Right. So again, to start with, let's understand what exactly is at zero trust, right? So what I hear or what I listen from many of these users or the audience out there is that everyone believes zero trust is basically an application or a tool, right? It's not that. A zero trust is a collection of concepts or ideas or principles, right? It's basically a strategy that's designed to minimize by enforcing least privileges or per request access decisions, right? So you are tightening those controls, you're securing your environment. How to do that? All the concepts, all the principles, when you collect all of them together and implement, that's called a zero trust, is right. But what is the core concept that lies in the zero trust, right? It's basically no user or no asset is implicitly trusted. Like if you have a user in your environment and you believe, like, that's a user who is inside my network, you're not going to believe that user, right? That's what one of the core concept. And always you work in zero trust, assuming the network is already compromised, and you're not going to trust anybody and verify explicitly. And you go with least privilege access, continuous authentications, strong identity. These are all core concepts of zero trust. You don't believe anyone even though they are inside the network. That's the primary principle within the zero trust, right? And why it's peculiar, right? Why it's so different? It's completely different from the regular standard security practices, right? So far, when we talk about security, past 5 years before or 6 years before, we talk all about firewalls, network stuff, and all those things. So zero trust is completely different towards that particular concept. So when we talk about the standard traditional practices, it's only perimeter defense, right? We protect only our perimeters but not inside. But zero trust is completely opposite to that. We protect the perimeter as well as the assets inside the perimeter. That's what the zero trust is. Okay. Again, the goal of zero trust is to prevent unauthorized access to assets, data, services by making the environment uh, stricter and making the access control as granular as possible. That's what basically a zero trust is, right? And again, just to give you some overview, what the problems with the traditional security models, right? We already spoke about the perimeter firewall, but let's see, more about what all the problems with the standard or traditional security models, right? So the traditional security model, as I said, once you are in the network, the previous security trust model believes that you are a safe person because you are inside the network, right? That's a big problem with a standard traditional security model. The other thing is like the lateral movement, right? So the problem with the lateral movement with the flat networks is, um, when you are inside the network, that means you can move laterally to any system or any particular asset or service. So that's a problem with the traditional model or the flat networks with the lateral movements. So with that, like, the malware can spread quickly, and once the breach happens, it's gonna spread enterprise wide. That's a problem with the lateral movements. And again, VPNs, they expand the attack surface, right? So why? When you get access to a VPN, it means you get access to the broad network, which is a kind of a problem with the traditional security model, right? And weak device trust. So if you do not have a proper device
Proper
trust,
device.
that's a problem with the traditional security model. Similarly, static access controls. When I say static access controls, you having an admin access to a service or to a system permanently, status, that's called static access control, which is again a problem, right? Because you uh, access or you accumulate the permissions, uh, continuously, you're going to have access to the system permanently, right? That's a problem with the traditional security model. And again, poor visibility after access is granted. uh, so once access is granted to a person or to a user on a system, again, the visibility is reduced in the previous traditional security models. So these are all some of the problems that will be addressed with a zero security trust, um, with all the principles that we're going to see. All right. So there are seven principles in zero trust, right? So one is all resources. So when I speak about all data and services as resources, consider this, right? So when you are planning to implement a zero trust, you have to scope everything in your organization or everything in your environment, whether it becomes a database, whether it is a security service, whether it is an application, whether it is an asset, whether it's an user. you know Everything has to be in the scope of zero trust. All data sources and computing services are considered resources, so everything is considered resource, right? That's what we call that, all resources to be part of the scope. And then, you have to secure all communications, whether it is a network location, whether it is inside the office or outside the network, it doesn't matter, right? When you talk about communication, it has to be secure, whether it is inside network or outside network. The location should not be considered. Always secure all communication. That's the second principle in the zero trust. The third one is per session access, or you can call as session based access, right? So the trust is evaluated before every individual connection, right? So since I securely connected to application X, uh, it doesn't provide me access to application Y, right? Because the per session access is another principle that acts as one great pillar in zero trust. And the dynamic policy. So again, coming to the dynamic policy, the access is determined by the client identity, the asset state, and the behavioral attributes. So what it does mean, right? So we're gonna see this in detail, but at a nutshell, the dynamic policy is like when you try to access a system or a resource, it's basically it has to go through a policy that's defined at the zero trust, saying whether are you eligible to access this resource or are you entitled to use this service, right? So that's what the dynamic policy is all about. And the fifth one is monitoring, right? So we have multiple applications in our environment. We do have multiple users, assets, and all those things, right? So the enterprise should monitor all the security posture of all assets, whether it is patches on the system, vulnerabilities, everything, right? That's what one other principle in zero trust. And the other principle is enforcing. So a strict enforcement of the policies, right? All resource authentication and authorization, it has to be strictly enforced. So before the access is allowed, the authentication and authorization must be enforced before providing access to any system. And the final one, the seventh one, is collect and improve, which is a continuous improvement. So we do have all these principles, policies, and all those things. We do have assets and all those things, but how do we improve the whole system, right? Unless we don't have a data, we can't collect the logs, or we can't improve the system. So we have to keep collecting the logs or the data to improve the security posture. So we have to configure our policies based on the data that we collect. So these are all the principles of the zero trust architecture, right?
Sure. I may ask you, like you mentioned about these seven principles, like which one is the hardest for an enterprise to implement? Or everything goes like hand in hand, like all these seven principles?
Good question. Thanks, Tarun, for asking that. So all seven principles goes hand in hand, but if you ask me the hardest principle to implement, like each and every principle is having its own set of policies or the procedures, right? Maybe for some organizations it's hard to implement securing all communication channels. Maybe that could be because of the legacy systems what they have in their environment, right? But for some of the organizations, maybe the last principle, collecting and improving the logs is, it could be challenging because they might not have the systems under one single roof, right? So it depends, or it varies, depends to organization, but all of the seven principles are must to follow to have a proper zero trust plan.
Okay. Yes, Kishore, go ahead. Like,
Okay, all right. Okay, nice. So let's see the brains and muscles behind this zero trust, right? So we're talking about the whole principles, policies, and all those things, but let's understand what are the brains and muscles of zero trust, right? How exactly this works. I know it looks complex, but it's not, believe me, it's not complex architecture. What do you see on these things, the left hand side, the CDM system, industry complex, threat intelligence, data policy, PKI, and all these things? Assume these are all the services that you use to implement the zero trust policies, right? For example, CDM, right, which is a continuous diagnostic and mitigation system. So what this does is, like, it gathers information about the enterprise assets, like if you have like 10,000 machines or 20,000 computers. So this is a CDM system that gathers information about all these assets, their current status, and what kind of patches that's applied to the system. Like, this is a kind of a whole level of kind of a database, maybe we can call that in layman terms. And this CDM system is integrated to the zero trust architecture, right? Similarly, the threat intelligence feed, right? You have to have some kind of a threat intelligence. Maybe the threat intelligence is coming from external or from your other systems. You need to integrate all these systems in order for you to make the zero trust work properly, right? If you don't have all these systems together, is it hard to implement zero trust? It's not hard, but the thing is, like, it may not work as you expected, right? Because if you don't feed anything to the zero trust architecture or to the policy engine, how it can make a decision, right? So if you don't know anything about your environment, or if you don't know anything about your particular machine, you can't do anything, right? Maybe let me put in this way. You bought a new car, and you don't know where the manuals are, right? So how you gonna drive? So basically, the same concepts apply here, right? If you have all these systems, it's better you collect all the data from all these systems, CDM systems, threat intelligence, activity logs, and all those things. And then you feed everything to the zero trust policy architecture. And then you ask, or you define the policies to make a call, right? So for instance, like, okay, maybe Tarun, I'll take you an as example. So if Tarun is trying to access a system, and if it doesn't get recorded in the audit logs, how do I know, like, Tarun accessed so and so system on a specific date, right? So if I don't have such kind of an activity logs, I can't make decisions, because if Tarun is trying to access a system again on January 1st, right? And if I don't know whether Tarun accessed the system previously in the month of December, I can't take some kind of a policy decisions, right? These are all important for the zero trust policy engine to take the decisions. Again, this is an architecture, this is not an application what I'm talking here. So these are the logical components. This is not an application, right? So let's understand these logical components, right? So see, on the left side, if you see the subject here, this is the user who is trying to access some kind of a resource in your organization, which is let's example, this is a database which this user is trying to access it, right? But before this user get hands on this database, this user has to be logged into a system. And then what happens in zero trust is, like, it verifies everything: who's this user is, how to know whether how the zero trust policy know who this user is, because it's getting that information from different systems, the CDM system, right? It's getting information from Active Directory about this user. And if he tries to access the resource from a specific system, we get the system details again from different uh, different services here, like from activity logs or the ID management or SIM systems, right? So we come to know all these details from these things. And then based on the policies that we draft here, whether this user is supposed to access this resource. Based on all these things, the policy engine, we will come to a decision point whether to allow this user to access this resource or not, right? And that is something the policy engine is going to take care. So the policy that we write to make the system access, it's going to provide its call or its decision to the policy enforcement point. So the policy enforcement point, the PEP, is the one which will either allow the user to access the system, or it will block the user to not to access the system, right? So that's how the whole thing works, right? And you need all these things to be configured in order for this policy decision point or policy engine to work properly. Okay. I mean, feel free to disturb me,
Yeah,
Harun, at
so
any
Kishore,
point.
we just want to know, like, with AI and automation coming in, so the brain and muscle you're explaining about, like, is it becoming smarter or it's getting more complex? Or does AI have any role into this particular whole thing? Like,
So that's really a good point. Um, Definitely, AI is enhancing all these things, right? While AI is doing bad things by bad people, but at the same time, the AI can be used in the whole policy decision point, right? So we can have dynamic policies that can be created by the AI when we integrate AI into the systems, right? So um, there is a new kind of a threat that got evolved, and we don't have such kind of a policies that's crafted in our organization, right? But when we integrate AI with this policy architecture, the AI can create a new policy within the policy engine on demand, in real time, and it's going to block the adversaries, in real time. So definitely, AI can be integrated with the zero trust, which is a good one, and it can enhance the system much better.
okay, okay,
Okay. And again, the PEP, what you see here on the screen, the PEP, that's a system that's responsible for enabling, monitoring, and eventually terminating the connections. So the policy engine is where you craft all the policies, like, what should happen when a person X is trying to access resource Y, right? So the policy engine is somewhere all these policies will be written. Like, say for example, okay, Tarun is trying to access the system from a location Y, right? When he tries to access that particular system from location Y, I can restrict you because I've created a policy where I told you, like, the Tarun can access only so and so database from specific location, and if he moves out of that location, he can't access the system, right? So if you travel outside of your country, if you travel outside to some other location, and if you try to access the system, that's where I write the policy saying that, okay, if he's coming from some location which I do not allowed, restrict that particular user. I can write such kind of a policies. At the same time, um, say for instance, like, you went to a coffee shop and you connected to a public free Wi-Fi, and you're trying to access some sensitive database, right? And even I can consider that, and I can restrict saying that, okay, if this particular user is coming from a network which is untrusted network, which is a free Wi-Fi basically, which has its flaws, and don't let this user to access the system. That's what the policy engine takes care of, right? And who is going to implement that policy? The PEP engine here, the policy enforcement point. That's where it will monitor all these things, and it will take the instructions from the policy engine, and then it will implement all these policies against that particular user or that particular system, right? So that's what this all whole architecture is about. And again, this is a logical component of the zero trust. It's not the application that we are talking here, right? What you see on all these things, these are all applications. The data policy, the data access policies, PK, ID management, SIEM systems, these are applications. When you make all these applications work together and you define the policies, that's what you are implementing the zero trust and taking calls and decisions. Okay. Right.
okay.
All right. So we already saw the seven principles, right? But let's see. how we can implement zero trust across all these five pillars, right? So we have users, assets, computers in our organization. So every organization has all these five pillars. When I say identity, it's all about user accounts, or the users from Active Directory and all those things. That's what identity is. Devices, again, your laptops, servers, IoTs, mobile phones, these are all devices. And networks, pretty much, right? So you, without network, you don't have any kind of organization, right? So networks is another pillar that you have in your organization. Applications and workloads, all your apps, all your services, these are one area that you need to ensure that you have implemented zero trust, right? And data, definitely. So y- these are all the five key pillars where we will be deep diving and see how we can implement zero trust across all these five pillars. So once you able to achieve the configurations and the principles across all these five pillars, that's what you are traveling towards a zero trust, right? We'll see everything in detail. Like this is a kind of a just overview that I'm talking here, but let's see each and every pillar in detail.
Yeah, Kishore, I just have one question, like quick
Yes,
one.
please.
So with BYOD, like bring your own device and remote work, so how realistic is it for enterprise to truly control the device? Although you explained in the earlier about the coffee shop example and all, like,
Mhm.
so is it a very tough thing, like because of remote work, BYOD options and all, how realistic is it, like for enterprise to truly control each and every devices, like using this
Okay,
zero trust?
this is the big misconception here, Tarun, right? When you say BYOD, the enterprises or organizations are not controlling the devices, but they're controlling the access, and they're controlling the data that the organization owns here, right? For example, like if I am working for an enterprise and if I bring my own laptop to do work for them, they they definitely don't allow me to connect my machine to their network, right? But still, we have a BYOD policy. What does that mean? Like, they can provide me a virtual machine where I can access that virtual machine from my BYOD device, and then I can connect to their network. But the barriers between the virtual machine and my physical personal machine, that will be controlled with all the policies that I'm talking about. So realistically, it's easy to implement, where you can definitely bring your BYOD devices and you can get all these personal cell phones. But the thing is, like, we are not controlling the devices from an enterprise standpoint, or we're not controlling the cell phones, the user cell phones, their personal cell phones, with all these policies. What we're trying to control here is like how better we can establish a kind of a firewall between your BYOD device and the enterprise
It's not
network,
zero.
right? That's what we are trying to achieve here.
Okay,
Hope
okay.
you understand that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Please go
But
ahead.
realistically, it's very easy to implement. It's not that hard. Once we configure the policies, all those things, it's pretty much easy to implement those things. We can definitely encourage the organizations to implement BYOD when we have all these policies configurations in place, right? If you don't have all these policies and those stuff, you can't encourage your users to bring their own devices to the work. That really put the whole organization into risk, right? So you need to have policies, configurations, security practices before you call the users to bring their devices, right? If you don't have a policy, the user can bring their devices, they can hook up their device to the network. We don't know what kind of a device they're bringing. We don't know whether that's vulnerable to any kind of risks, or if it is having any kind of a malware that's already installed on that machine, and you're hooking up, or you're allowing that particular user's personal machine into the network. That means you are opening gates for risky adversaries. So I would not highly encourage that. Bring the concept of BYOD when you believe that you have secured your perimeters, the inside assets, all those things, and only then you have to encourage your users to bring the BYODs.
Okay.
All right. All right. So let's talk about the first pillar, right? The first pillar in our zero trust is identity, right? So when you talk about identity, we have so many things to do in identity. So when I say about identity, I spoke to you about user accounts, the Active Directory system, and all those things, right? So what do you need to do in terms of zero trust when we talk about identities, right? So first thing is, like, we need to ensure all, or the enterprises, you should ensure that every user is enforced with multi-factor authentication. So before they try to access anything, right, ensure you have a multi-factor authentication. Again, we have different varieties of multi-factor authentication, but if you ask me, I would definitely suggest to implement a phishing resistant multi-factor authentication, because it's very easy to bypass the standard multi-factor authentications like text, SMS, or voice call. That's very much easy to bypass those things, right? So implement a phishing resistant MFA when it comes to the identity portion, right? So this is first thing that every organizations must do. And the second thing is like validating users and identities, right? So you have an enterprise where you have like millions of users, or not millions, say for instance like you have thousands of users, right? So if you don't have a proper governance on on these user accounts, they are the ones which are the adversaries gonna use. So if you don't have any kind of a users who are not using the accounts frequently, disable those accounts, right? You can have automations where you can implement to disable the inactive accounts. So you created a user account for so and so user, but if that account is not being used by anybody, it's better to deactivate those accounts, like don't keep those accounts, right? That's the second thing that you can implement as part of the zero trust. And the third thing is like just in time access or just enough access. So just in time and just enough access, these are the two very important components, right? So I've seen multiple clients, when an administrator joins their organizations, they'll just right away provide access to every system, right? Which is a very bad practice. The reason is like, if that particular administrator is doing a work on a specific application or specific area, we have to provide access to that particular admin only to the scope of area or to the scope of application. We don't have to provide all the access to the entire application, right? That's just enough access. So proceed with only least privileged access, like, don't proceed with high level access. And again, just in time. So if that particular administrator requires access for a specific period of time, follow that, like, don't make that permanent access permanent or static. So if that admin came to your organization who is going to work for a project for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just provide the access only for that particular point of time. And even that, implement tools like privileged access management or CyberArk. There are so many tools out there where you can implement the privileged access management, which will let the administrator have access only on demand basis. So if I'm not trying to do, or if I'm not doing anything today on a application from an administrator standpoint, I should not have access to that application if it's not needed. But when I want to do something on that application from an admin standpoint, then I can request that access, then gain the access and do the admin activities, right? So that's one other piece that the administrators or the enterprise should look into, right? Keep reviewing all these access. Yeah. Sorry, Tarun, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Like, I just want to interrupt here. So, like, where do most zero trust identity implementation fail? This is some questions that we are getting. Like, is it the technology gap, or poor policy design, or lack of executive buy-in? Like,
I would say policies, definitely, right? So policies are the main culprits here, because if you don't have a policy, it's very hard to implement all these things, right? So poor policy management is one thing. So you need to have a policy at enterprise level, or at least at a department level. So if you don't define those policies and if you try to implement all these things, it's not going to work. Because when I try to implement just in time access, maybe the other application owners or other department owners, they don't like it, right? But this is where the gap is coming between the departments and the teams, where they have to sit together, understand what these are, and then define policies about all these things, right?
sure,
So
go
these,
ahead.
yeah. Yeah, so these are all the things that are part of the zero trust identity pillar. I mean, these are some of the important things that I highlighted, but there are numerous things like the continuous validation, right? So when it comes to the continuous validation, you need to have policies to continuously validate the user or the administrator. So say for instance, like you implemented multi-factor authentication and you say like, oh yeah, I have implemented multi-factor authentication, now my environment is secure. It's not like that, right? You need to keep validating that particular multi-factor authentication system. Is there any kind of improvement that I can implement in MFA? Or say for instance, like, I can bring a new policy where I can ask the user to challenge MFA periodically, maybe monthly once, or can I ask the user to confirm his or her multi-factor information is up to date, right? So this is a continuous validation that one should look into to improve all these standards towards your identity.
Like,
And the second pillar, yep, sorry, go ahead.
I'll, so should disabling inactive accounts be manually governance?
So I heard a part of your question, Tarun. So disabling inactive accounts should not be a manual effort, right? So it has to be automated. Um, if you have a manual effort in disabling inactive accounts every day, it's going to eat up all the precious time of the administrators. So definitely, there are so many tools out there, or you can have your own in-house tool developed to keep all these inactive accounts disabled on a day-to-day basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, right? But implement that. If you don't have brains, or sorry, if you don't have enough resources to implement that one, at least start with manual activity, right? Maybe do that at least once in a month or once in a week. Spend a couple of hours to find out which are all the inactive accounts that are there in your organization and deactivate them. Then once you start at least those practices, you will find, or you'll start protecting your environment.
Sure, Kishore, go ahead. Like,
All right. Right. So this is the second pillar that I want to talk, right? The devices. So protecting or how to implement zero trust in terms of devices, right? So when I said devices, it's not just computers, right? It's everything. Like you have servers, you have laptops, you have machines, your IoT devices, routers, networks, everything. Everything falls under the device, right? So you have printers as well, right? Printers, network equipment, and many more. So all this falls under devices section. So when you talk about the zero trust in terms of devices, you have to consider how to protect all these devices. What are the best things that you can implement in terms of zero trust to protect your devices, right? One, automated methods to manage the devices. So if you don't have appropriate asset management system, that's a big flaw. So try to bring a proper asset management system where you can track all the devices, your computers, your servers, your network, routers, your printers, your switches, everything has to be managed through your asset management system. If you don't know where your device is, if you don't know where your server is located, and if you don't know what kind of an application is running on the server, that's something scary, right? So develop an automated asset management system. That's first thing that you need to do even before you want to do anything with the zero trust in devices, right? If you don't have that such kind of a data, you're just building a system which doesn't work for the devices, right? And the second is compliance. The compliance throughout the lifetime of the devices and virtual assets. So as long as the device is compliant and it's hooked to your network, it's doing something, it has to be protected, it has to be under the principle of zero trust, right? So follow that policy, and track all these physical and virtual assets, right? As I said, how do you do that? Asset management system. So do that with asset management system. And automate the status of collection, right? You have to automate the status of the collection of all these devices into the asset management system. So you have so many asset management system tools out there, which will work based on what do you call the agent. So when you deploy an agent onto the systems, it will track all the systems, it will bring every piece of detail about that particular system or server or IoT device, and it's going to feed all the information to asset management system, right? So why we need to bring all these things is, if you don't have all these things, we don't know what our devices are, we don't know what we need to do with, we don't know where the vulnerability lies, right? Once you have all this asset management system, then you will come to know what kind of a devices I have in my environment, which are vulnerable, which are not vulnerable, which doesn't have patches installed, right? So I have 1,000 servers in my environment, and do I know how many servers among these 1,000 machines are compliant with the latest patch system? Do we know which systems are vulnerable? If we don't know that, that's a big security lapse over there, right? So if we have that kind of a system, develop that, and then you can make your appliances, or you can make your servers or machines up to date with all the patches and vulnerabilities, right? So this is where you can improve more on zero, from a zero trust perspective,
Okay.
right? Sorry, you have any question,
Yeah.
Tarun? You want to talk?
Uh, yeah, I just wanted to know so zero trust assumes you have full visibility of devices and assets. In reality, what about like in many large scale organization, do they need a lot of people to manage this entire zero trust thing, or one guy is more than enough? Like, and how risky is that gap? And where should enterprise start fixing it first?
Right. So, I mean, definitely it's not a one man show, right? So, you need to have a team of people to implement all these things, right? And again, as I said, zero trust is not a kind of a one time implementation, or it's one time goal. So, it's basically a journey, right? You need to keep revising what you have implemented. And this is a kind of a never ending task, right? So, definitely it's not a one man show. And it's a group of people or a team that has to keep continuously monitoring and improving their systems, right? So that's how you implement the zero trust and you manage the zero trust principles.
And if an enterprise, let's say, gets breached today,
Mhm.
despite of having zero trust tools, is it usually a technology failure or a leadership or a process failure? Like, where does zero trust actually break in the real world? Like,
So I would not say it's a lack of leadership or responsibility. The thing is, like, every system has its own flaws, right? Again, if you implement zero trust and you secure all your systems and everything, and still you got attacked, that means, like, you have some kind of a flaw in your implementation plan, right? Maybe there could be some system which is not up to the date. For example, as I said earlier, implementing multi-factor authentication doesn't give you the confidence of zero trust implementation, right? Because that multi-factor authentication, the basic multi-factor authentication, is still prone to attacks, right? So that's what, when zero trust implementation is keep evolving. So when you see the zero trust version 1, or the initial days of zero trust, the principle is, like, implement multi-factor authentication. But later, the zero trust is evolved, and they said, like, okay, multi-factor authentication is just not alone enough, but you need to bring in phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. So if an organization did not moved or evolved into that phase, and it's prone to risk, they can't say that we have implemented all the zero trust principles, because MFA, implementing MFA doesn't make your enterprise prone to attacks, right? So you have to evolve, you need to improvise, or you need to improve all these policies when you are just going year on year, because that the attackers out there, they're having new tactics, evolving tactics that can bypass all these configurations. So that's what I'll say, like, policies, implementation, procedures, leadership, these are all they have to act together, and they need to implement all these policies, and they need to improvise all these policies, they need to improve all these things every day to day.
okay. And at what point does zero trust usually fail? Is it because of some misalignment or misconfiguration? Where do you
Yes.
typically see that this fails? Like exactly.
So the typical failures, I would say, is when you try to bring some kind of a new animal or a new application into the system, right? The ecosystem. So say for instance, like I know what my environment is having, I know how many applications I have, and I know how the system works, right? And all of a sudden, like without my knowledge, if somebody tries to get in a new system into the environment, which is prone to issues, which is prone to vulnerable attacks, that's where we are opening doors for the attackers, right? So again, when you implement the zero trust with for the existing applications, it's all fine, but when you bring a new application to the system, that's where the game changes. So when you have proper defined policies on how to onboard specific applications into the ecosystem, you're not prone to attacks, right? So that's one area everyone has to think through when they are introducing some new applications into their ecosystem.
Okay, sure. Go ahead. Sure.
All right. Okay, so again, the problem with the previous network configurations, right? What you see on the left hand side is a kind of a corporate network where when you enter into corporate network, you get access to everything, right? Pretty much. So that's what the traditional model looks like in the olden days. But when you trying to implement zero trust, the principle here is like segment your network, right? So say for instance, you have very sensitive applications, very critical applications that are maybe related to public safety or that are related to your healthcare system, like such kind of a workloads or applications, they should not be sitting next to or sitting in the same ecosystem, right? So move those such kind of a workloads into a separate network segment altogether. What is the reason why we have to do that is, if a specific network got compromised, right, you're not making that uh, attacker to laterally move to the other application, because we segmented the network here, right? So we have a critical workload A here, a critical workload B here, right? So if an attacker was able to successfully hack this critical system over here or a service here, he will not be able to move to the next service because we segmented this network and we isolated the critical workloads. That means they don't have any kind of a communication with the other network or other systems, right? If you see that, if a group of people working on a critical project, it's better to have a separate or dedicated network for only such kind of a people, right? And then whatever the external workloads, they won't be able to talk to these critical workloads, right? So this is one policy that I would highly encourage these enterprises to implement in terms of micro segmenting their network for better implementation of zero trust. All right.
Yep.
Okay. So that's with networks. And application pillar is another area in the zero trust, where what we're talking here is like protect your applications, like wrap your applications with application threat protection policies, where you can protect your applications through the policies again, right? So try to make the applications accessible through a private networks. Okay, don't make your applications to be accessible throughout the network. So if you have a critical application, make sure that application can be accessed only or through specific network or specific users. Again, those can be all be defined in the policy engine, which I have told you about the logical components, right? So define those policies, define the policies to protect your application so that you are not making your applications visible to everyone. This is another one key pillar for the data, right? So when we talk about a zero trust for data, the first thing that comes into everyone's mind is encryption, right? So you have crucial amount of data that you need to manage, right? So data is key. That's a gold mine for anybody, right? So if I get hold of somebody's enterprise, the first thing that I look at is data, right? So encrypt the data at rest or in transit. That's the first principle that you need to follow. And the
So
second
we have,
thing is, sorry,
sorry to interrupt, like, can zero trust slow down DevOps if done wrong?
sorry, come again.
There's a question like which, like, can zero trust slow down DevOps if done wrong? If
Okay,
implemented,
That's a good question. Yeah, if done wrong, yes, definitely it's going to break the applications, right? So if I am, too much protective, and if I say like, okay, this application or this DevOps system can be accessed only by so and so network and those things, maybe I could be breaking the system, right? So when you define the policies, when you define the zero trust architecture, you need to consider all these things, right? You should not kill the user experience, but implementing with appropriate policies, definitely it's gonna be a more protective layer for your DevOps applications or for anything. But implementing that without considering those things, definitely it's going to be a business breaker, right? So that's what we need to consider. And a last point on data that I want to talk is like, label the data, right? So this is one thing that usually enterprises doesn't consider. So you have loads and loads of data, but how do you know like which data or which document is sensitive document, which document is not a sensitive document? It's based on the content inside the document. You have millions and millions of documents inside your databases, right? But if you don't label them, it's a very big risk. Label them so that you can apply the zero trust policies appropriately. So if I label all my documents in my in my folder, I can easily pick out like, which is my document that contains a sensitive information about my health records, my social security details and all those things, right? Then I can keep those documents protected in a protective layer, right? That's what we have to do, the same in the enterprises. So label your data, encrypt the data both at rest or in transit.
Okay, Kishore, there is one more question. Who should truly own the encryption key? Security team, IT, or the business?
That's a good question, right? So it depends on application to applications, function to function, right? So whoever is implementing that particular encryption, it's not definitely not the service provider. So say for instance, like, we have a service providers like Azure, Google, or AWS and all those things. They do provide encryption, but at the end of the day, like, it's the customer who owns the key. So even somebody is trying to encrypt the data for you, it's not the one who is implementer should own the key. It's a customer who should own the key, who is the proprietary of the data. They are the ones who should own the key. No, not everyone.
And there is another question. If a company has to pick one thing first in the data pillar, what should it be? Visibility, access control, or encryption?
Encryption, I would say, definitely encryption is the first thing that they need to control, because you don't believe there are so many lawsuits out there, uh, which will make enterprises implement data encryption on day one. Because if you lost a kind of asset or a device that has sensitive data, that's going to lead to so many of lawsuits. So definitely encryption is the one thing.
Okay, go ahead, Kishore. Like, and users who are watching right now, if there is any questions, you can put it on the chat. Like,
Sure,
we'll be
sure,
taking up.
definitely. Right. So again, these are all the five pillars that we are like, talking about in detail, right? But to bring everything into one single chat, this is what I would say, right? I know it's not a one day implementation plan, right? Zero trust definitely takes couple of months, maybe sometimes years also, depending on the that particular enterprise situation, how large it is, and all those things, right? So start from here, right? So what do we have traditionally in terms of identity, like passwords or multi-factor authentication? Step up that level, step up that level to MFA with passwords, hosted stores and all those things, and increase that level to advanced level, right? Move away from standard MFA to phishing resistant MFA, and then implement just in time access, enterprise wide integrations and all those things, right? So start from here, move to optimal level, right? So check where you are right now. So if you are with multi-factor authentication with passwords, that means you are at the initial level in the identity pillar. But if you are at phishing resistant MFA only in your enterprise, that means you are at advanced level. Try to move it to optimal level, right? So the same applies to all the other pillars: devices, networks and applications. So if you have a data pillar that we are talking here, you are doing manual inventory, meaning like you are labeling your documents manually, like all the million documents. That's where you are in traditional mode, right? Move away from here, try to label the documents, which is an advanced layer. So each level you move and you implement all these things, right? And again, once you reach optimal level, that's not the end of it, right? So try to improve your systems even when you reach optimal level. So if you implement a dynamic DLP, try to enhance the DLP policies. What else I can implement to enhance my DLP policies, right? So try to move from one level to another level, and try to be at optimal, right? So this is all five pillars that I've explained previously, and check your status by uh, seeing all these things where you are. And this is one small classic example that I want to put out here, right? So um, previously, if before zero trust, this is how an employee access a specific resource in their organization. So this guy, same as I gave an example, sitting at a coffee shop and trying to access the network, and he connects to a VPN and he gain access to every resource, which should not be in this case. Okay, so when you implement a zero trust, this is how your thinking should be. You have to have a multi-factor authentication check whether the user device is properly patched, whether the device health is up to date. If that's not a device of somebody else, check that one, and then provide access to one of these resource, whatever he's trying to access or she's trying to access. If this user is trying to access only HR database, you need to allow only access to that particular database, not nothing else. So that's what zero trust is, right? As I said, like, it's a collection of principles. It's not like, it's not a tool or it's not an application. So this is how you have to change your model of access or model of your security from traditional approach to the zero trust approach.
Kishore, I have a question. Like, how should vendor
Yes.
realistically sell zero trust to enterprise that are still that are still mid journey, not fully mature? Like,
How the vendors, like, that's a good question, right? So it's a sales pitch. So definitely, educate the clients the with the reality, right? What happens if they do not follow the zero trust approach model? Like, what will be the consequences, right? And it's not always trying to sell the best practices, but tell them the consequences, how a zero trust with implement with sorry how not implementing a zero trust can make their enterprise worse. Talk about that, and that's how you sell the concept of zero trust to their clients.
okay, okay, Kishore, go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I, I mean, that's the wrap. But again, as I said, zero trust, it's not a goal here. It's a journey basically for the whole transformation, right? So if you are here, just you're securing your perimeter, it's no longer sufficient, right? Move from the traditional approach of security towards a zero trust, where you need to ensure you are protecting every asset inside your environment, right? If you just secure your perimeter, definitely someday that perimeter wall is going to be collapsed, right? So move away from that perimeter wall defense and implement the zero trust, where you can protect your assets, your identities, your data, your applications, everything, right? And yep, if you have any additional questions, I'm happy to answer.
So Kishore, we do have few questions. Like, so I'll be just listing on the screen right now. It's 1930. So I don't know if you can see that question on the screen. Are you able to see?
Yes,
Like,
I can.
yeah. So enterprise already have IAM, EDR, DLP, SIEM. What genuinely moves the needle? Like, and what is just vendor overlap? Probably from a vendor, I believe.
Right. So you have all good tools, right? You have identity access management system, EDR, data loss protection, the SIEM tools, and all those things. But the thing is, like, how well you gel all these things together to improve the policies, right? That's what you need to consider in order to move your needle. So bringing I mean, implementing all these systems is not just a thing that we are expecting, right? How we bring all this together to improve the policies, that's what we need to target.
Okay, and one second, like,
Oh, I see in a question, the budget question. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Right. I
Yeah,
mean,
zero
this is the same thing that every organization faces, right?
trust.
Definitely, when
So I
security
think,
team talks about,
because there are people who are listening, I'll just read the question. Probably they won't be able to see the screen.
I'm
So
sorry,
zero
yeah.
trust sounds ideal, but budgets are limited. Which pillar usually gets funded first? Identity, device, or network, and why?
Okay, so funding, like, you should not consider like funding individual pillars. So you have to consolidate everything together, right? But if you ask me where to start, definitely start with identity, right? And network. Identity is the one big pillar that I see where we have more gaps, or which are more risk to attacks, right? Because if you don't protect your identities, that's where the attackers are going to get into your systems. Protect your identities. Try to first start with identity, then proceed with network, and then applications, and finally to the data. Any other questions, Tarun? I do see a lot of questions here.
Yeah, we have one more thing. I'll just quickly put that. Yeah. So, from buyer's lens, how should enterprise separate the real zero trust platform from vendors just rebranding existing tools? Like,
Okay. So it's a kind of a tricky question, right? So from a buyer's lens, how should enterprise separate real zero trust platforms from vendors just rebranding existing tools? Could be, right. So they could be just rebranding the tools and all those things, but start dwelling more into the zero trust policies, right? So try to put all your requirements first, like what I'm trying to do. Like, just don't go ahead and try to listen to the vendor. Now put your arguments first. What I am trying to implement in my organization is comes first, right? If you have a requirement to protect my data, then start exploring from that angle, right? Don't fall for the sales pitch. Okay. I know that there are so many tools out there, it's very confusing to get implemented. Use the quadrant systems. You have Gartner systems to just measure the tools out there. So try to use those things, and then lay down all your requirements, and then map these things to the tools that can definitely give you the fruitful results, right? So choose that path and then procure a tool. Like, again, as I said, you can't implement zero trust tool by just procuring one tool, right? It's all about the policies that you define, and the policies that you implement, right? So to implement those policies, what tools I want, start from that perspective, and then you proceed to procure the tools that you can use to implement the zero trust. Hope I
okay,
answered that question.
Kishore. Yes. Okay, Kishore. I believe like we are out of time right now. Probably we can sit again someday. And yeah, like, is there anything that you want to have a closing statement of anything you want to put it up like?
Like a closing statement, but definitely, I mean, um feel free to connect if you have more questions. I have provided my details in the slides, so I'm always available over LinkedIn, or you can email me if you have any kind of questions, or if you want to feel free to talk more about these things. Definitely I'm available.
So, okay, Kishore, thank you so much, and we will connect again soon. And maybe in next session, you can explain further more in details about any other security challenges what enterprise would be facing. Yep.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Taran, for having me, and thank you very much, audience, for listening to this. And hope we'll talk again soon. Thank you,
Yep.
everyone, and have